Your throat burns. Your body aches. You cannot stand without swaying. Every instinct tells you to lie down and stop moving. Today you reach for a pill. You text someone. You know that help exists and that most illnesses pass. But what happened when ancient humans got sick? What did your ancestors do when there were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no doctors, and no understanding of what a germ even was? For roughly 300,000 years, your body got sick the same way it does now. The same pathogens, the same fevers, the same infected wounds. The difference is what happened next. And the answer, when you look at the evidence, is not what you expect. Most people assume prehistoric illness was a death sentence. You got a fever. You died. You got a bad cut. You died. Life was brutal, short, and merciless. But the bones tell a different story. When paleoanthropologists, scientists who study ancient human remains, examine skeletons from prehistoric burial sites, they find something remarkable. Evidence of serious injury and illness that healed completely. People who broke limbs, survived infections, endured conditions that would have been debilitating, and kept living for years afterward. That does not happen by accident. That happens because someone took care of them. John Gurcha, a paleo artist who has spent decades reconstructing ancient human life from fossil evidence, has described early human groups as surprisingly tender with the sick and the weak. But the clearest physical evidence comes from sites like Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, excavated by archaeologist Ralph Solecki in the 1950s and 1960s. Inside, Solecki and his team found the remains of Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary cousins, buried roughly 60,000 years ago. One skeleton, known as Shanidar 1, was remarkable. This individual had survived to an older age despite a withered arm, a healed eye socket injury suggesting he may have been partially blind, and severe arthritis. He could not have functioned as a hunter, he could not have gathered his own food reliably, and yet he lived. Someone fed him, someone kept him alive. This is the first thing to understand about ancient illness. It was not a solitary experience. Your ancestors got sick inside a group, and that group responded. So let's reconstruct what that actually looked like. You wake up and something is wrong. Your body is hot in the way that means fever, not warmth. You cannot eat. The group is preparing to move, but you cannot walk at full pace. What happens? In a band of hunter-gatherers, the social structure your ancestors lived in for the vast majority of human history, the group slows down. Someone stays with you. The load you were carrying gets distributed among other members. This was not charity. This was strategy. You were a member of a small, interdependent group of between 20 and 50 people. Your skills, your memory, your relationships were irreplaceable. Losing you was a cost the group could not afford if it could be prevented. Anthropologist Kim Hill, who spent decades studying the Ache people of Paraguay, one of the most closely observed modern hunter-gatherer groups in the world, found that sick and injured members were consistently cared for by the group rather than abandoned. Caregiving was not a cultural choice. It was a survival mechanism built into the social structure of small bands. But they did not simply wait. They treated you. Your ancestors had a pharmacopoeia, a medicine chest, that existed entirely in the living world around them, and it was more sophisticated than you might imagine. A 2017 study published in the journal Scientific Reports analyzed the dental calculus, hardened plaque, of Neanderthal remains from El Cedron Cave in Spain. Researchers, including Keith Dobney of the University of Liverpool, found chemical traces of plants in the teeth that had no nutritional value whatsoever: yarrow, groundsel, and poplar bark. Poplar bark contains salicin, the same compound that eventually became aspirin. Yarrow has documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. These were not accidentally eaten. These plants were consumed deliberately, most likely by someone who was sick. Your ancestors were not guessing. They were observing. Generations of observation, passed down orally across thousands of years, produced a working knowledge of which plants lowered fever, which reduced swelling, which stopped bleeding, and which killed infection when applied to a wound. Ethnobotanist Paul Allen Cox has documented how isolated indigenous groups around the world independently converged on the same medicinal plants. Not through cultural exchange, but through accumulated trial and error. The same plants, the same uses discovered separately because the evidence worked. Fever was likely understood not as the disease itself, but as a signal, a sign that the body was fighting. Willow bark tea, rich in salicylates, the natural precursors to aspirin, would have reduced fever and pain. Clay was applied to wounds in many ancient cultures, and modern analysis has confirmed that certain clay minerals have genuine antibacterial properties. Honey, found in archaeological sites going back at least 8,000 years, is one of the most potent natural antimicrobials known to science. It does not expire. It kills bacteria by dehydrating them. Your ancestors almost certainly knew it worked on wounds long before anyone understood why. They packed wounds. They immobilized broken bones using splints made from wood and plant fiber. They used heat, heated stones, steam, to treat respiratory illness. And evidence from Blombos Cave in South Africa, one of the most important early human archaeological sites in the world, suggests that your ancestors had a sophisticated relationship with natural materials and their properties going back at least 75,000 years. The capacity to observe, remember, and apply was there. Now, some illnesses could not be treated. A severe abdominal infection, a burst appendix, rabies, certain cancers. These were death sentences then, as they would have been until very recently. Childbirth was genuinely dangerous and remains the leading cause of death for women in many ancient skeletal populations. Childhood was perilous. Roughly half of all children born in prehistoric populations did not survive to adulthood, based on skeletal evidence from multiple burial sites. But here is the counterintuitive truth that changes how you see prehistoric life. The illnesses that killed your ancestors in the greatest numbers, the plagues, the epidemics, the mass infectious diseases, were largely not a feature of prehistoric life at all. They were a consequence of something your ancestors did later. They settled down. Agriculture, which began roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago in places like the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, changed everything about human health. When your ancestors started farming, they began living in permanent settlements near domesticated animals. Pigs, cattle, chickens, goats. Each of those animals carried pathogens. Some of those pathogens jumped to humans. Smallpox, measles, influenza, tuberculosis. These are diseases of agricultural civilization. They require dense human populations to survive and spread. A mobile band of 30 people cannot sustain a measles outbreak. A city of 10,000 people absolutely can. Anthropologist Mark Nathan Cohen, in his landmark 1977 analysis of prehistoric health, found that the skeletal record shows a clear and significant decline in human health at the moment populations transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming. Farmers were shorter than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Their bones showed more evidence of nutritional deficiency. Their teeth were worse. Their life expectancy dropped. They ate more food, but they ate less variety, and that narrow diet made them vulnerable in ways their ancestors were not. Your hunter-gatherer ancestors ate dozens of different plant species across a season. They ate bone marrow, organs, fish, berries, tubers, seeds, nuts. Their diet was varied enough that a single crop failure did not mean starvation. Farming made humans more productive and eventually more numerous, but it made each individual human more fragile. So what happened when ancient humans got sick? They were cared for. They were treated with real plant medicines that genuinely worked. They rested inside a social structure designed to absorb the cost of illness, and they were largely protected by their own mobility and small group size from the catastrophic epidemics that would later define human suffering for thousands of years. The picture is not of brutal indifference to suffering. It is of something older and more honest than that. A community that understood, without ever articulating it, that the sick person lying on the ground was not a burden. They were a member, and members were worth saving. Your throat still burns when you get sick. Your body still aches in exactly the same way. The fever your immune system raises today is the same fever your ancestor ran in a cave 50,000 years ago. The difference is that back then, someone in your group was already gathering willow bark.